Hey, welcome to Beyond Organic Wine. I'm Adam Huss. Thanks so much for listening. With Beyond Organic Wine, I hope to inspire and inform you with ecological solutions to building a healthier, more resilient, more diverse, and more delicious wine culture so that you can have meaningful impact on shaping the future of wine. If you'd like to support Beyond Organic Wine and make free episodes like this and all the other content possible at Beyond Organic Wine, you can subscribe on the Substack app or at beyondorganicwine.substack.com. Huge thanks to those of you who already subscribe. I couldn't do it without you. This episode takes us on an adventure, a quest really, paddling a canoe up the river of time. The years turn back with each dip of the oar in the glassy water. Tree shadows swirl out from the misty ripples just before dawn. An eagle watches us from the top of a tall pine. A doe leads her fawn to drink in the quiet eddies of memory. A heron pauses from stalking the water's edge, and a turtle slides off a bare log as we follow the channel of the current upstream into a time out of time. We're in northern Minnesota over 50 years ago now, and we're seeking a key to the future of wine where the forest spills onto the banks of the river. Our guide on this journey is Patrick Pierquet. 50 years ago, he's still a grad student in his 20s. He tells us stories of working with Elmer Swenson while he scans the foliage along the river for a bit of wild magic. A wild vine that has the spark of potential to become something else. A grape that could become a piece of the culture and history of wine in North America. He doesn't know it yet, but today the horned god will favor him. One of the wild vines he will find today, he will pollinate to become the parent of Frontenac noir, Frontenac blanc, and Frontenac gris. And later, his new grapes will become the parents of Pierquet and many other grape varieties at the hands of people like Tom Plocher, Peter Hempstead, and many others working in universities and private grape breeding programs across the United States and Canada. He doesn't know yet how far this wild vine that catches his eye today will go. He doesn't know that it will be the subject of a podcast episode set in a vineyard in Vermont and get planted at the base of a macadamia nut tree in the concrete jungle of Los Angeles. How often do we take actions that might have ripples for centuries and affect the lives of people we can't imagine? But he dips his paddle again into the current, moving with a rhythm much older and larger than his life, a rhythm that can only be known by the motion of his arms in the dawn mist with the water flowing against time, on a quest for a priceless ruby riparian gem. Enjoy. Patrick, welcome. Thanks so much for doing this. Yeah. It's great to have you on Beyond Organic Wine. And could you sort of introduce who you are, where you are, and then we'll get into more details.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm no longer working in grapes or wine. I'm retired, have been for quite some time. But I originally from Wisconsin and then moved to Minnesota for graduate school in horticulture. And then I worked in their grape and wine program there for several years. And then I kind of bounced around, and the last 12 years of my working life, I was the winemaker for Ohio State University here in Worcester, Ohio. So that's kind of a quick summary of what I've done.
Well, you've been involved in grape breeding as for a big part of your career. Is that correct?
Well, the early part, yes.
The early part,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? What got your start? Like, what was that all about?
Sure. Well, I'd always been interested in wild grapes, and they grew all over the neighborhood where I grew up. We were on the outskirts of town, and we always made jelly from them and that sort of thing. So it was always a fascination of mine. And for whatever reason, I originally went to college and studied forestry. And actually, happily, I did not get a job when I graduated, and I had to think of what to do. And so I worked as a janitor for a year while I pondered that. And then I had been corresponding with Elmer Swenson for some time, and can't remember how I first heard about him, but he was working at the University of Minnesota, and I got in contact with the professor in charge, Cecil Stushnoff, and he offered me a place in grad school there, and that was it. I moved there, and I was there for 3 years, I think, working on my grad degree, and then I worked full time at the research center for a couple of years after that. And my my main goal when I was a grad student, one of the main goals was to collect superior specimens of wild grapes that grew in the area to use those for breeding.
Oh. So you were
Because
kind of Indiana Jones of grapes
kind
and
of
wild
like,
grapes.
yeah.
Nice.
In
That
fact,
sounds like a lot of fun.
yeah. So I did a lot of driving around and several canoe trips on the Minnesota River,
Ah,
and yeah, and then a visit up to Canada, Morden, Manitoba Research Center. They have a very large planting of wild grapes from seeds that they collected there, and
oh
like
wow.
yeah, like any fruit plant, when you plant the seeds, you get a lot of variation in the
Right.
seedlings. So my goal was to select the superior ones in one way or another and bring them back to Minnesota, which I did, and use them in breeding.
And you're behind. I mean, your work went into quite a few grape varieties that are now still being used. I mean, can you talk a little bit about how yeah, we're talk about
Sure.
that and yeah.
Sure. Well, the best known one is the variety Frontenac that was introduced. Oh, I think in 1996 or something like that. At the University of Minnesota. I was long gone since then, but I had made that cross and I grew out all those seedlings in the vineyard. And then along came Peter Hempstead, who actually worked full time in grape breeding. He's the one that was impressed by Frontenac and named it and introduced it. And that was a cross between a wild grape that I found on the Minnesota River, and cross was a French hybrid grape. So that was the first one in their line of introductions.
Oh
And from
wow.
there, yeah, and you probably know the later on Frontenac mutated in color, and they have a Frontenac gris, which is gray. It's actually more of a dusty pink. And then
Yeah.
there's a Frontenac blanc, which is the
Yeah.
white mutation. So that's kind of rare that varieties will do that, but and you can't foresee that. It just happens. So
Yeah, and I mean honestly, I did a whole episode about well, sort of about where Frontenac Gris was sort of the motif throughout the whole episode.
oh
I was helping to pick it up in Vermont, and I did a sort of live recording in the interview as we picked Frontenac Gris.
oh
Um, yeah, and I love the wines that come out of Frontenac Gris. I've just planted some Frontenac Gris
oh
on
good.
actually, and have some. I think I have some Frontenac Blanc and Noir growing here in Los Angeles. Believe it or not, in my
Oh
yard. So yeah, that your grape has gotten around
yeah.
from its humble beginnings along the river there. Um, yeah. Any what other great any are there any other varieties that are out there that people might have heard of, or so obscure that they
Sure.
haven't heard of, or
Well, yeah, all of the since Frontenac was introduced, there have been I don't know off the top of my head, maybe half a dozen more varieties from the University of Minnesota,
uh-huh.
and all of those, if you look at their parentage diagrams, all of them have in their parentage either grandparent or great grandparent or whatever. They have some of the crosses that I made when I was a grad student there. So
Gotcha.
yeah, it's like Marquette is one of the better known, getting to be popular, and that has a cross in its background with one of the Canadian riparias. If you look at the parentage diagrams of those varieties, anytime you see Riparia 37 or Riparia 39 or Riparia 89 or whatever, those are all selections that I made from the wild, and those crosses, those first crosses were crosses that I made. There was a hand in a number of those back in their early parentage.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
I mean, it's yeah. I don't know. There's something really special about the fact that you were the he had the hand in that. I know it's like a group effort, especially over a university setting like that. But
Yeah, yeah, I
it,
call it a tag team breeding
it's
is what it is.
that's good. I mean,
Yeah,
I think we need that, even if it's like a private breeder. It almost makes sense to have like
sure.
some like succession plan, because it's such a long process, and you could lose so much great stuff if you just
Oh yeah,
if your life was the limit of of that
right.
process.
Yeah,
um
exactly.
yeah, but I mean, it's really cool that you were the one out there on the canoe finding the things that now people are drinking, decades later,
Yeah.
uh, in so many different wines across the country and probably around the world. I'm sure that some of those varieties have traveled around too. I know they're international, at least between Canada and the U.S.
Oh, Canada. Yeah. Uh-huh.
But I imagine they might be intercontinental. Has anything gone over to Europe of those that you're aware
I
of,
I don't know for sure. It would be best to
or Japan
ask.
maybe? Or
Could be. But Peter Hempstead, who's also retired now, but he was the grape breeder there for, gosh, 15 years or something, and he would know if any
yeah.
of those varieties have been planted internationally. So I was out of the loop after.
By that point.
Yeah.
Well, one of the did you enjoy that aspect of the work? Like I mean, can you describe sort of what the grape breeding process was like for you? Like how what are the skills necessary to be a good grape breeder?
Oh, a lot of luck actually. That helps. But yeah, it's well, the process is pretty simple, really. The wild grapes that I collected, wild grapes are always in the form of either a male flower or a female flower. They do not combine the two of them, and so you just select plants that have fruit, and then when they flower in the springtime, there are no stamens that carry pollen. It's just a seed bearing body, and it's very easy to make a cross on them. You take pollen from another desired variety. In my case, it was mostly French hybrids, and just put it on the pistil, and voila, the seed grows, and you've got a cross. So
And
it's
then but you protect those once you make that pollen, that once you pollinate those that flower,
right.
you're protecting that cluster. I'm guessing you're bagging it up
Yeah,
until
yeah. Put little
harvest.
put little brown bags around it so that you don't get any stray pollen from the wind or whatever, and yeah, so that you can be certain of what your cross is.
And then, I don't know if, I don't know how far people will get into this, but often when we look at hybrids that don't reach the level, or even if they do reach the level before they get a name to them, they have this usually a series of letters and numbers. Can you sort of describe where that comes from?
Sure,
What that references?
sure. Well, every individual breeder and university breeder uses a slightly different system. And Elmer Swenson used just the easiest the numerical system, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like that. And
Yeah.
each time he made what we call a selection, when you go through your seedlings and you see one that seems to have some promise, then you flag that or mark it in some way and give it a number. Um, Other people in his own home vineyards, Elmer used to use the convention of uh, plant or row number and plant number. So, for instance, his one of his varieties that he used for breeding was 1-63. So
Uh-huh.
it means nothing to anybody except the breeder. So
Right, right.
yeah,
Got it.
and so and the University of Minnesota used the sequential numbers. Cornell University, I believe, uses a kind of a complicated way of designating. They use the date of the cross and then the number of the selection. So you'll see a year date in there, and then a dot, and then a number of the selection. So
Got
they're
it.
yeah, each numbering system is a little bit unique.
And I guess, I mean, I know that there is an academic consideration in tracking, what the parents were and that kind of thing from each thing. And so then we have this sort of record going back where we have family trees that,
Right.
this, whatever grape you end up selecting out of your nursery has this whole lineage behind it that can be traced. But if you were maybe a less organized person, for example, or didn't care so much about that, that's really, I mean, what is there any other reason you would want to do that if other than academic reasons, like is it to, I mean, if you just wanted to like plant a bunch of seedlings out and then pick the one that was your favorite because
Right.
you wanted to grow it did well on your farm,
Sure.
would there, I mean, are there any other advantages to that numbering system and keeping track of the parentages?
Yeah. Well, the one big advantage of keeping track of the parentage is you might decide that one of your selections you want to cross it further with other varieties, and so you don't want to back what they do back cross to a variety that you already used. So
Got it.
so Frontenac used. I used a variety called Landau Noir, a French
Yeah.
hybrid for the pollen parent. And after Frontenac was selected, Frontenac was also used further in some breeding, but you would never want to cross it once again with Landau Noir because you would get a lot of what they call inbreeding depression. So,
Ah,
so really, yeah, really keeping fine track of the parentage is really of most interest to the breeder. It really means little or nothing to the grower or the winemaker.
right. Sounds like you're a cat person like me. Is that
Uh,
true?
yep,
Sounds like you have a very talkative cat like mine can be at times.
yeah.
um, well, I mean, so you mentioned Elmer Swenson a couple times. Why was he so successful at creating so many varieties? I mean, what as an individual, how was he able to do that?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting, kind of a complicated situation. But he had been a hobbyist essentially for
Uh-huh.
much of his life. I think he started his grape breeding back when he was a dairy farmer, and that was back in the 1940s or 50s.
Okay.
And he was influenced by uh, primarily by a guy by the name of Munson. You may have come across his book
Sure. Yeah.
found
Absolutely.
Foundations of American Grape Culture, and that was
Yeah.
Elmer's kind of the way he got started. He was inspired by that, and
Did he work with Munson, or did he just
no,
read
I think
his work and stuff?
yeah, I think Munson was long gone.
Oh,
I think
okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
his book was back in the twenties, nineteen
Okay.
twenties.
Got it. Got it.
So, but that was his inspiration, as far as I know. And so he did. This was his hobby. He'd get done milking the cows, and he'd go work in his vineyard. So, yeah, it was
That's
just
good.
a fascination to him. And eventually, the story I heard, Elmer eventually came to the University of Minnesota Research Center before they had any grape breeding going on, and he brought a couple of examples of his superior grapes, and the supervisor was so impressed that they offered him a job, and he that it wasn't a job breeding grapes per se because they did not have a designated position for that, but he did work in the vineyards and in the orchards and things like that. He had kind of an all purpose job working and maintaining the research plots at the time. So
And as I think remember you saying, this quickly became his full time occupation working with them, but
right.
he kept up the breeding at home, but he didn't like the job was far enough away from home. Can you sort of describe how
Yeah.
what his life was like at that point?
Yeah, yeah. It was actually very interesting, although it was a kind of a stretch to maintain that sort of lifestyle. But yeah, he sold all his cows and his milking equipment, and then he started working full time for the University of Minnesota at the research center. The research center is located about 40 miles west of Minneapolis, and Elmer's home is in Wisconsin, northwestern Wisconsin. So he would have to make the drive from his home. I think it was about 75 miles to the research center where his new full time job was, and they had an old farmhouse. It was kind of fallen down, but it was still habitable. And Elmer and a few other people lived in the farmhouse during the week, and then on the weekends he'd go back to his farm. And like I say, actually, that's where he did most of his grape breeding. He still had his vineyards very well tended in Wisconsin, and that's where he did his breeding. And then to earn his salary, he'd commute to Minnesota on Sunday night and work in the apple orchards for the rest of the week. So yeah, it's kind of very, very different.
Wow. It sounds like he was a high energy guy.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he would have to have been. Yeah, he did. One interesting story, he did say that the day that he auctioned off all his cows and milking equipment was the happiest day of his life. So, because as everybody knows, dairy farming is a lot of work. So
That's funny. I just talked to another wine grower in Quebec who used to be a dairy farmer and has sworn off dairy farming now that they're in wine. They're like, never again. Well, and you got to work with Elmer, right? I mean, did you worked on his farm up there, his personal farm?
Yeah, well, actually, there were several of us. David McGregor, who was actually a private grape breeder himself, although he's no longer involved with that. But he and I oftentimes helped Elmer on weekends when Elmer was home, and we install trellis posts and do whatever tillage was necessary and that sort of thing. So
yeah.
So it wasn't every weekend, but during the growing season, it was probably every other weekend. And so I did work up there. It was just volunteer work. And then I was at the university when Elmer was at the university research center as well. So
okay, and I guess my question was that question of like, how did he accomplish so much? Do you think it was? I mean, did he have a large nursery? Like what? Or was it like numbers, or was it just the time that he did it, or was he incredibly lucky, or was it a combination of all of those?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of all of those. He was lucky, but he was also very persistent and, like you said, high energy. And he chose just intuitively. He knew, or he thought he knew the varieties that would make the best parents for his crosses, and a lot of that worked out that way. So.
How much space did he dedicate to nursery area?
I think he had several acres back at his farm. It was all on top of a hillside. I'm trying to remember now. I can picture it, but I would guess it's several acres. Which, if you're growing seedlings, that's a lot, because when you plant the seedlings, you only have to plant them a foot apart or so to begin with. So you're getting a couple thousand seedlings per acre.
Yeah, so he had a numbers situation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what the like was he doing any kind of fungal treatments or anything like that, or was the point to not do that so that he could? I mean, other than the breeding stock, was he doing anything?
Yeah. He did. Typically, he would spray for fungus 1 or 2 times a year, 3 times if it was a bad year, which is really quite minimal. That would be called a minimal spray program. He just wanted to help differentiate between the fungus resistant plants and those that were not. So even with 1 or 2 sprays, if there was a seedling that was highly susceptible to fungal diseases, it would show it. It would demonstrate that by the end of the season. So he was a minimum spray type guy, and that's what differentiated some of his varieties.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Did you? I mean, what other kind of stories did you have? Did you interact with him personally?
Oh yeah. We didn't work exactly together at the university research farm, but we always had lunch and break time together, and we do stuff in the evenings and things like that. So, and then like I said, on weekends, sometimes I help him on his own farm up in Wisconsin. That was always a pleasant place to be. It was very, very picturesque, hilly lakes all around. So that was a nice place to be. Yeah.
Nice. I mean, do you have any personal stories of interacting with him that might be of interest to people to understand, to to get to know the character?
Well, yeah, the one story I said when he sold his dairy equipment, and that was
Yeah,
he's
yeah.
pretty adamant about that, and he lived. His wife was alive at the time, Louise, and in fact, he named one of his grape varieties Louise
I
after her.
I
Yeah.
have Louise growing here as well
Oh,
in Los
interesting.
Angeles. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. But yeah, and we'd have when I helped him on weekends, we'd have lunch together and things like that. So
Yeah, that's great. Nice. Yeah. Well, I'm envisioning this young person, a young version of you in your 20s, I imagine, on a canoe paddling around hunting vines. This sounds very romantic, and as the beginnings of some of these grapes, I mean, I think it's so great to hear that for anybody who's making wine with them because it adds such depth to that thing.
yeah,
What were you looking for? What was that like? Can you take us back to those moments in your life?
sure, sure. Well, wild grapes typically, you've probably seen wild grapes, and most grape species in the wild have rather small clusters. And so one of the first things I was looking for was something with an abnormally large cluster. So the
Hmm.
yield would be greater. But what I also did is I took fruit samples from several hundred wild vines, and I numbered them all in the wild, and then I brought the fruit back and measured the sugar and the acidity and the pH of the juice. And
Uh-huh.
so I was looking for something that was higher in sugar than the normal wild grape, so it would make good wine,
Uh-huh.
and preferably lower in acidity. Although I was working with Vitis riparia grapes in the north there, and
S-
they yeah,
Lower
yeah,
acidity is very relative with
right,
that.
right. Yeah, they're real. Yeah, they'll ruin your teeth. They're so high in acid. So but I did the best I could, and it
Yeah.
was one way of screening them.
Yeah. Well, and what was that process like? Did you go out, find the vine in the wild and sort of tag it and then come back to it in the winter to get to prune and take cuttings, or
Right,
that
exactly.
was what you did? So
Yeah.
you wouldn't use the seeds. You would try to
Oh,
propagate it clonally
yeah, yeah.
and
So
then got
if
it.
you canoed down the river where I was, you would see a very odd sight of grapevines with little tags hanging from them with numbers on them.
Did any of your tags ever go missing or your vines
Oh,
ever
I'm
get
sure
lost?
by now they have. I'm sure by now they have, but no. Luckily, the seed parent of Frontenac was easy to find, and turned out fortuitous. So,
Yeah. I mean, do you recommend this for people who live in areas where a lot of wild vines grow to sort of keep an eye on those kind of things and maybe do something like that? Do a little
um,
if
yeah,
you're
I would
especially
say,
if you're a wine person, you know.
yeah, yeah, I would say sure, because the wild grapes, like any perennial crop, they have a lot of variability in their genetics, and if they grow in your area, if you see wild grapes or wild fruit of any kind growing in your area, and they seem to be doing well, that means that those particular plants are well adapted to your area.
Yeah.
They might not be well adapted to other areas, but they're well adapted to your area. So if you find something that impresses you, maybe a little bit larger fruit than normal, or a little bit sweeter, or whatever, ripens earlier than normal, that could be a real good candidate for breeding material.
Yeah, that's lovely. Did you did this pursuit which sounds like, you know, you were very grape oriented at some point for at least a portion of your time, and then maybe that continued on in different ways, but what how did your career progress after that and from those early days?
Sure. Well, once I finished grad school, and then I went to work full time at the University of Minnesota Research Center, and I was working in the fruit breeding program, the larger fruit breeding program. And at that time, apples and blackberries and blueberries were probably the primary crops. So I made a lot of crosses on those crops and grew out the seedlings and that sort of thing. And like Elmer, in my spare time, I'd work with the grapes. The grape breeding was not an official element of the University of Minnesota until Peter Hempstead was hired years later.
Got it. So you continued on more just the fruit breeding program, and that became the
Right,
emphasis of your career. Nice.
right.
Did you like wine? Did you ever fall in love with wine because of your work with these grapes?
Oh, sure, sure. Kind of the taste developed, and there were quite a number of amateur winemakers in the area, and they were interested in what we were doing, and so they would oftentimes take the fruit and make their own wines from it, and then we'd get together in late winter and sample all of our efforts. So yeah, I developed a great interest in wine then. So and because I didn't have a lot of money, it was easier to make my own wine. So
Right, right.
yeah.
Any good stuff? Like, what were your favorites in terms of making wine? Like the
Oh,
fruit that you, I mean, the grapes or fruit, you know.
yeah, yeah. Well, Frontenac was one.
Okay.
That was a tasty.
Yeah.
Frontenac is pretty high in acid, though, so the winemaker has to deal with that.
Yeah. How did
Um,
you deal with that?
well, there's a technique that's called malolactic fermentation, and that
Sure.
you help to induce that in red wines anyway.
Yeah.
And you can do that by adjusting nutrient content and leaving the wine to rest on its sediment for a while,
Yeah.
and that will reduce the acidity by maybe a third, maybe a little more. It makes it more palatable.
And are there any in the field techniques? Like I've heard of, I know somebody who's making wine with actual wild riparia, and they
Hmm.
let it hang until after the first heavy frost.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, uh,
That's
does that help Frontenac, or does that just ruin Frontenac?
no. That's a very good point. That's the one thing with wild grapes. Most people, including myself, when I was a youngster collecting them for jelly, we'd pick them as soon as they turned color. And obviously, they're only starting to ripen at that point. Uh, so, for wine, where you want uh, maximum sugar content and minimum acid content, it helps to let them hang longer.
Yeah.
And yeah, some people just use a rule of thumb. We pick them when we have the first frost.
Uh-huh.
Um, Commercially, although they measure the sugar content as the season progresses.
Do you ever get into grapevine genetics or anything like that? The history of the genetics, or the wild? I mean, have are you did you get fascinated by anything in the genetics of grapes in North America or anything like that? That like you?
Yeah,
Yeah. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, I read everything I could about grape breeding at the time, and as you probably know, Cornell University had a very extensive, and they still do, grape breeding program. So it was fun to see the parents that they were using successfully, and University of California at Davis, they also had and still have a grape breeding program. And of course, their objectives are very different in California. Objectives are mostly disease resistant and resistance to phylloxera and sharpshooter, whatever that is. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Pierce's disease. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
That's what
and
we're looking for out here.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, it helps to know as much as you can about the parents that you're using. Yeah.
Do grape? I mean, having worked with a lot of different kind of fruits, do grapes impress you in any special way, or are they, or not really? I'm just curious.
Um, well, it's sort of a romantic thing, and they grow on trellises and have a very nice display of the fruit, and most vineyards are planted in on hillsides for frost control purposes, and that's very scenic. So, so
Yeah,
most vineyard areas are very pretty, very attractive places geologically. So yeah, that's one of the reasons for the attraction.
huh. So with a, I mean, I don't know if you know the full story from the time that you selected some of those wild grapes to the point of,
Hmm.
Frontenac getting its name. But do you know, I mean, like how many, what were the numbers out of which it was, it, it was selected? Like were, tens of thousands of seedlings?
Yeah, yeah. Well, as far as the total number of seedlings, I don't really know. I'm sure it was in the thousands
Yeah.
because typically the superior individuals that you select really make up only a few percent of the seeds that you plant because most of them will be defective in one way or another, or fruit is too small or whatever. And
Yeah.
so you end up making selections that are only a small percentage of all the seeds that you planted. And
Right.
that's typical for pretty much every fruit breeding program too. If you
Yeah.
want to find a good apple and doing some breeding, you have to plant hundreds or thousands of seeds. So
Yeah. Do they, I mean, I found when I planted some seeds that you also just get fruitless vines quite a bit of the time.
yeah, those are most likely staminate. They're probably male vines, and they they have clusters to be early in the year, but they only grow pollen. There's no
Got it.
Yeah, there's no organ on the fruit that grows a seed. So, and then when they're done shedding their pollen, they dry up and fall off.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that can happen with hermaphroditic vines as well, or perfect flowered vines as well.
Well, yeah, I suppose if for some reason they're just not well adapted to that particular location.
Yeah. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, any advice for anybody who's thinking about breeding grapes?
Hmm. You got to have patience.
Okay. Yeah, what is the time frame that people should think about? Like even if they get lucky, if
Yeah,
you're doing
yeah,
traditional breeding.
yeah. It's interesting to see the genesis, if you will, of different varieties. For instance, Cornell University just introduced a white wine variety, Aravel, I believe is what it's called, and
Yeah.
that cross was made 42 years earlier.
Wow.
So yeah, so they've been evaluating it for that long a time, and I think Frontenac. I think I made that cross back in mid '70s, and it was introduced in 1996. So that would be a little over 20 years. So that's pretty typical of fruit breeding because they have these
Right.
long generation times. You plant the seed, and a vine will grow, but it will not bear fruit until 3 or 4 years later. So you got this long period of time when you're just sitting back waiting to see what it has.
And I mean, part of that is just repeated trials, right? Because you kind of know
Yeah,
you have something good after a few, like three,
sure,
4 or 5 years, right? Once you've made
sure,
the wine from it, and you're like, it survived, multiple winters
right.
and that kind of thing. You can kind of, different vintages with different rainfall and pressures
Hmm.
throughout the year. Um, but then you're just testing it in different locations because you want it to be something that's not too too localized in its
Sure,
specificity that it can't be applied to more people. That's more
sure.
useful to more people. Is there? I mean, I know Frontenac now is like I mean I should mention for anybody that doesn't understand, but like with now when people are breeding, if you're a private breeder, like it can take 20 years and you're not getting paid for that 20 years, right? So
Right,
people once they get to that variety level for the grapes, there's a royalty that's attached once it's patented. Like, well, you create a patent for your grape, and then you can charge a royalty as this gets sold through nurseries and stuff like that. Um, and that helps you recoup that 20 years without pay.
right.
To a certain extent, that's the reward that you get for 20 years without pay.
Yeah.
With universities, is that true? Are there royalties, or is the whole idea of universities that it's more of a public service to
Yeah, that's a good
farmers?
question. Yeah, good question. That's gone kind of back and forth, even within a single university. Um, I think there's been some sentiment that the university works for the whole population, and they should not gain anything special over their creations. And so a lot of universities and a lot of fruit breeding programs, they just put a name on their new variety, and then they just send it out into the world, and whatever happens happens. But
Huh.
but the last 20 years or so, there's been more of a direction, particularly with universities like Minnesota or Cornell University, where the university actually will patent the new variety and get a small amount, maybe 50 cents per vine, and they put that money back into their further breeding program. So there's a rationale either way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, good point. Um, well, did we miss getting you telling any stories? Do you have any more stories?
Uh, well, I think Elmer inspired a number of other people too. There, I think I mentioned David McGregor, who I think now he's a small crops farmer. He has a farm northwest of Minneapolis, and he actually started some grape breeding on his own, and he introduced one variety called Troubadour, which is a
Okay.
very, very, very hardy red wine variety. But I don't know that it ever caught on. And then another person who was an admirer of Elmer's was Tom Plocher,
Oh yeah.
Plocher. And Tom, in fact, is continuing breeding grapes, and he has his own website and his own business. And a number of his varieties have actually been fairly successful, and they've been planted commercially in the north. And then there
Yeah.
was one fellow down in Iowa, I believe it was Ed something, and he was also a breeder, and he introduced one variety as well, but he gave it up because the use of herbicide is so extensive in Iowa that and vineyards vines are very susceptible to herbicide damage. He
Yeah.
just could not grow his vines anymore. They're always getting knocked back. So
Yeah. The
he's
the
yeah.
neighboring farm drift.
Right.
Yeah, I've that's what I've heard from everybody who's growing grapes in the Midwest, that at some point they
Yeah.
lose their entire vineyard to
Yeah.
dicamba 2,4-D drift.
Yeah. 2,4-D especially. Yeah. And
Yeah.
then the other person that I mentioned, of course, um, who am I thinking of? Peter Hempstead.
Oh
He's
yeah.
he actually still is breeding grapes as well, and he has
Oh,
his
okay.
own
Oh,
his
that's
own
right. He went
website.
private, right? Yeah, I think
Yeah. Yeah.
his son is involved as well, I
Yeah.
believe. So we may have a succession plan there.
And he actually, as far as his website indicates, he actually has connections with overseas in different countries and at different universities. And they're trying
Yeah.
some of his varieties in Europe and Eastern Europe and Asia and that sort of thing. So,
Yeah, I mean, did you have any international exposure when you were in that uh, area of your life, in terms of taking your grapes abroad or working with other universities abroad?
yeah, no, it was too early. I was, um, in fact, Frontenac was the first introduction from my breeding work, and that happened about quite a number of years after I left the university. So I wasn't even
Okay,
there when they named it. That was
I
Peter
got you.
Hempstead's work. Yeah.
Got it. And I mean, do you know if like Geisenheim was breeding back then? Were they, how recent? Do you know anything about
Yeah,
how
I
recent?
don't. Yeah, not. I don't know exactly, but I think they've been around for a long time. There are quite a number of varieties have come from the Geisenheim breeding work. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I really don't know. Back in the United States, when I was doing my breeding work, it was Cornell University and myself and Harold Omo at University of California, Davis. And that was about it. I guess they had some breeding work going on in Arkansas at the time as well, but it was not widespread. Anyway,
Have you had any experiences where you've been drinking Frontenac at a winery or something like that, where somebody discovers that you're the person that helped make it possible?
no, I haven't had that happen at
Oh man,
all. So,
you haven't used your celebrity in any
no.
form.
Mhm.
Look at you. Um, Well, and any other story? I mean, was there any other stories about Elmer that I should have asked you about? Anything that you've heard about, or just fun stuff that you know?
Well, there was he got towards the end of his life, he got really sick and could not work in his vineyards anymore. He was retired, and gosh, I think he was close to 90, and he became kind of incapacitated. So he went to live with his daughter somewhere, and his vineyard and his farm were still there, and there was a group of people, and for the life of me, I can't remember their names. There were about a half a dozen that got together and they formed what they called the Swenson Preservation Project, and they would all get together and go on weekends, and they would go up and take care of Elmer's vines,
Ah,
and and kind of continue on his work. And that I don't know how long that lasted. Eventually, they all lost interest, but there may have been one or two varieties. There may have been one or two varieties that came out of that work. I'm really not sure, but that was
okay,
kind of interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
Swenson Preservation Project.
yeah, that's great. Well, anything else? Anything else about for any inspirational things that came out of your work that you want to pass on to anybody?
Hmm. Well, um, it just depends what your interests are, of course, and
Yeah, I mean,
for what.
related to your interests, we'll say.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, related to grapes, like I said, my fascination went way back to my childhood years,
Yeah.
and there's really been interest in grapes for that long. So,
Yeah. Sounds like you got to become something that you loved as a child.
yeah,
uh,
that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
that's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
I also had it's kind of an aside story, but I also had a real fascination with elderberries.
Oh
Do you have
yeah.
yeah? And I often made wine and jelly from them as well. And I had the University of Minnesota had an elderberry program when I went to grad school there. I may very well have chosen elderberries to work with rather than grapes, because it just for whatever reason it's a fascinating plant.
Yeah. What fascinates you about it? I mean, I know
Yeah,
a little bit about it, and it does fascinate me. But I'm curious
yeah.
to know.
Well, I like the fruit, and you can use it for so many different things.
Yeah.
And now there's even some health claims made for
Yeah.
elderberry juice, so
Yeah.
that we didn't know at the time. But
Well, isn't there something that like eating the raw berry is not a good thing, so that's why it's a perfect candidate for fermentation, or is that hearsay? Am I making that up?
um, I don't really know. I don't know that I've ever eaten a raw elderberry. I've always turned them into jelly or wine. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
always heard that you needed to cook them or ferment them, and
could
that
be. Yeah.
became that got rid of the. I wish I could speak to it, but so my instincts were right about this. I knew I remembered something. Raw elderberries contain cyanogenic glycosides, which can turn into cyanide when metabolized in your body. So not a great thing to ingest. Causes nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, stomach cramps. But cooking makes them safe. It neutralizes the cyanogenic compounds, and fermentation does the same thing. So always ferment or cook, heat up those raw elderberries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know there's like the elderberry cordial is almost like a home remedy for winter colds and flus and
Oh,
stuff like that.
oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, and I think I think there is a elderberry breeding program now through like the Savannah Institute there in the Midwest. Do you know about that at all?
I don't. I don't.
Okay, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you might be interested in that. I think there are some fun things happening with elderberry. Maybe it's
Well,
worth checking.
they used to breed elderberries at Cornell University, and
Oh,
they did introduce I think four different varieties.
oh,
Um, you can find it in their past writings. So,
oh, okay.
but yeah, they had a can't remember what the guy's name was, but one of their fruit breeders was very interested in elderberries during his time there.
Nice. Well, anything else?
Um, he did, like I said before, if you're interested in breeding fruit of any kind, you got to have a lot of patience.
Yeah,
So you got to have some other income. So
got it. It's a good thing to do on the side. It's a good
yeah,
weekend hobby.
yeah.
And do you, I mean, is there is there a level of meticulousness? Like, are you a very organized person?
Yeah, I think I am. It's, I mean, just keeping track of the records and the parentage of all the different selections.
That's about
There's a
it.
little meticulousness with that, and we always had written records that we kept in the vault at the research center in Minnesota, so that the next person coming along would be able to access that. And of course, now they're putting everything on computer, I'm sure, but we actually wrote in pencil on paper.
Yeah.
That's the way we kept our records.
Would you recommend? I mean, for somebody who is interested in this in their area, do you? I mean, is there a way to approach this that you'd recommend?
Um, well, I can't think of anything. The things is just keep in mind that it's a very low output activity. Like I said, you may grow 5 or 10,000 seedlings, and there may only be less than a handful that out of those that show promise. So
So I'm
you got to.
guessing it's helpful to have. So you need a nursery area. I'm wondering if Elmer's nursery was protected from deer because I know there were probably a lot of deer in
Yeah,
northern
no, they
Minnesota.
weren't. I don't recall any fencing around it, but
Huh.
yeah,
Wild.
yeah.
And so I imagine you'd need an indoor greenhouse type situation as well for growing out the seedlings individually.
That's very helpful. Yeah, you grow out the individual seedlings in small pots, and then
Right.
and then plant them out in the vineyard the next year. And that way you could eliminate too. There, when they grow the first year, sometimes you'll see a seedling that's deformed or whatever reason that is just not growing well. You can toss it out before you plant it in the vineyard. So
Got it. Yeah. And is that like how were you doing that back in the day? Did you have a bunch of little plastic trays like people use now, or
yeah,
what kind of? Yeah, even back
exactly,
then, it was
exactly.
like
Yep.
so. Plastic has helped breeding probably
Oh yeah,
significantly.
yeah.
Um, I wonder, yeah, back in the day, what were people doing back in the 1800s? Like the initial French American hybrid crosses that were done. Is
Yeah,
that
I don't know. Yeah.
yeah. So having like a greenhouse where you can do your starts and then transfer them out into the field after the whatever during into the growing season, so you can get them started and then they get a nice
Right.
jump on everything. Um, and probably having a refrigerator or something like that to hold the seeds is probably a good idea.
Oh yeah, yeah. I We always stored the seeds under refrigeration. They maintain their viability for a longer period of time that way. So yeah.
Nice. Just in a bag or in soil,
Well,
any kind of.
I we had I forget what they called them. They were the big jars.
Oh, okay. So
Uh,
you just put them in like a mason jar or something like that.
yeah, they weren't really mason jars. They were a special jar made especially for storing seeds.
Oh,
And
okay.
there was a reservoir in the bottom where you'd put glycerin, and
Okay.
glycerin removes moisture from the air. So not
Oh,
and then you'd put the seeds on top, and you put the whole thing in the refrigerator. So not only were the seeds cold, but they were also dry, and that extended the viability for a number of years.
so that allowed you to like they then the seeds don't start to degrade and rot or
Right,
anything like that. So you could
right.
use like silica packets maybe if you were doing it.
Yeah,
You know,
probably. Yeah,
if you didn't
yeah.
have those special jars, you could put it like a mason jar with a silica packet in.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm just trying to understand, like trying to anybody who's maybe thinking about this, what kind of process and equipment they might want to consider having to facilitate this. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and those are the main stages. Like you got to make the crosses out in the field, then you protect the grape and collect the seeds at the end of the season from
Right,
those clusters, and then put those seeds in the fridge over the winter, and then plant them into the greenhouse when it's time, when it's appropriate, and
hmm,
then once they grow, back out into the field they go. That's
right.
yeah. Okay. All right. And yeah, think about and I'm shocked that he didn't have like deer fencing.
Yeah.
Did he have big dogs that roamed the property?
No, no, he didn't have any animals. I guess
Huh.
he had a bunch of feral cats in the barn, but no
Yeah.
dogs. But
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. There were a lot of deer. He was
Huh.
right in the middle of the woods out there. So
But his varieties don't repel deer, if I remember correctly.
no, no, I
The
don't.
deer do like them.
Oh yeah, yeah. Deer love grapevines. Yep.
Yeah. All right. All right. Well, great. Yeah. Well, thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for sharing this. It is really. I mean, it's really cool to hear how the beginnings of some of these grapes that we now work with.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it's good, and to hear the voice of the guy who was finding these out in the wild. So yeah, thank you.
You bet.
Thanks so much for listening, and a big thanks to Colden Pro for the music at the beginning and the end of this episode. And if you'd like to support this episode and everything that I do at Beyond Organic Wine, you probably can do that best by becoming a subscriber at beyondorganicwine.substack.com or on the Substack app. Thank you so much for your support.